Welcome, everybody. My name's Peter O'Neill. I'm the director of the Imagine Belfast Festival. So you're very welcome to this first day of broadcast. I'm delighted to be able to introduce this event, the role of culture in urban regeneration and community development, and welcome our keynote presenter today, Dr. Gus Casely-Hayford OBE, who's a director of the V&A East in London. Gus will describe the approach adopted by V&A to community engagement and regeneration, which will be followed by a number of responses from local leaders in this field. Gus joined the V&A in March 2020, and before that was the Executive Director of Arts Strategy at the Arts Council England. He's a leading historian, cultural commentator, so absolutely delighted that Gus will be able to lead out this talk for us. But we're also pleased to have three very renowned, well-known local panelists who will respond to Gus's presentation. And they include, in no particular order, Susan Picken, who's the director of the Cathedral Quarter Trust, the cultural regeneration agency working in Belfast City Centre Cathedral Quarter. Among the projects that she and the Trust delivers is the yearly Culture Night event, which attracts audiences over 90,000 people to our city centre. We also have Jack Spencer, who's the founding partner of Urban Scale Interventions, a creative studio tackling challenges in the places where we live. Before establishing USI, Jack led the social and cultural research space at the Royal College of Art in London. And last, but certainly not least, we have Suzanne Wiley, who took up the post of Chief Executive of Belfast City Council in 2014. During her time in the council, she's built strong relationships with the private and wider public sectors, pitching Belfast globally as a place to live, work, invest, and visit. Susan has led the creation of the Belfast Agenda, and more recently, the £1 billion Belfast Region City deal, which will be a key investment pillar for how the city and the region rebuilds and recovers in the wake of the pandemic. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Gus to our virtual podium, and I look forward to hearing his presentation.
Thank you so much, Peter, and thank you to everyone who brought us together today, and thank you to my fellow panel members. It's a great privilege to join you. About a decade ago, I spent some time in the Southern Sahara, and I was researching in the ancient libraries of Timbuktu. And these are, if you ever get the chance, do visit. These are fragile and precious archives that boast documents that date back to the 14th century. And it's a body of writing that captures the Renaissance of one of the great African intellectual desert cultures. And one of the surprising things, or at least to me, was that its creators, that they were radical, deeply radical, liberal, and open to good ideas wherever they originated. And they wanted to emancipate their citizens through knowledge, to dynamize their population through access to the very finest thinking. And they were successful in doing that. They attracted the most brilliant minds who helped to establish and develop one of the great bodies of learning. And today, even in the face of fundamentalist and highly corrosive forces, against the backdrop of powerful impacts of global warming, the city's population remain absolutely steadfastly committed to their investment in that wonderful history of cosmopolitan learning and heritage. And that sense of history, that sense of reaching out beyond their local vicinity, it's palpable. And the value of culture remains evident everywhere. And you still see that sense of history and heritage evident even in the young people. At the end of their school day, they have this amazing tradition that they pour water across their writing boards to wash away their notes. And they capture the last of the inky droplets in their cupped hands, and they swallow the contents. And it's born of this belief in the preciousness of learning, of heritage, of culture, of how it can actually be imbibed to become a part of you. And one really mercilessly hot afternoon, I took shelter from the sun. This is on the edge of the Sahara, where we're located. I took shelter from the sun in one of these beautiful private libraries, and it's an exquisite place, just lit by thin ribbons of sunlight that were somehow forcing their way through these really ancient and desiccated shutters that had stood in these windows for ages, and they had basically disintegrated into lace. And the air in the space had grown thick with a kind of soup of parchment and termite dust. Lifetimes of scholarship swirled alive in the atmosphere, and the accreted material evidence of decades of learning sat as a layer of dust on every surface. And quite frankly, it was magical. Rather than an abstract discipline, here history felt sensory, it felt animate, it felt palpable. And in being there, you couldn't help but leave evidence of your own presence. For the place in turn to leave a really meaningful mark upon you. I utterly love that idea of being altered through the interaction with things, and perhaps of those things being in turn changed by my being there, and of others in turn again being affected by that process, of that whole organic, ever-changing, growing corporeal narrative becoming enriched and simultaneously weakened with time. And as part of my role, I'm now a year in at V&A East, I've been overseeing the creation of a new collection centre and a museum in Stratford in East London. And the collection centre will, when it's complete, hold more than 250,000 objects and 1,000 archives, which are safeguarded for the public. But I'm determined that this won't just be a space in which exquisite things come to be conserved. A key metric for our collection centre success must be how this body of material culture touches our visitors. And critically, that our space and narratives will in turn be altered by our visitors. We want as much of the collection to be open and to be accessible, to allow for a meaningful, supervised public engagement. And as a complement to that, we're keen that we'll create the digital infrastructure to capture the stories and the reactions of those who visit, so that over time, that this space will become as much loved for its collection of wonderful things as it will be a body of wonderful reflections. And after a year in which sharing and social communion has felt so difficult, so problematic, I long for this celebration of our fundamental need to share, to celebrate, to remember, and to do it together. And we set out at the beginning of this journey by asking our future audiences in East London. And these audiences are some of the most diverse, economically challenged, and culturally underserved in Britain. And we asked them, what do they actually want? What do you want? And they, like other people of their generation, they want authenticity. They want real proximity. They want to experience things as well as learn about them. They want, in some way, to experience the world in such a way that it reflects them and their needs, for it to be customized, for their experiences to be unique, to be real. They want experiences that will leave them changed. And in turn, They want those interactions to be meaningful, to be two-way, so that they might have the chance of leaving our institutions changed too. From us, they want world-class art, and they want to feel that grit of history. And we, in all honesty, we want that too. Why have a great collection if the people who ultimately own it cannot access it? Why have a great collection if it cannot be used to touch and inspire the young? Why have a great collection if its display is not optimized to inspire the creation of great new art? But of course, there are fundamental questions of sustainability. How do we conserve, preserve, secure our collections while simultaneously balancing those aspirations against our real need to ensure meaningful access, to give practitioners, to give communities, academics, the kind of access that will allow them to understand an object's physicality, to get to grips with its utility, to feel the wonder that's unique to those moments when you are uniquely in the presence of truly ancient, truly important, truly beautiful things. And how do we demonstrate rigorous museology without so abstracting objects from their context that they cease to have that kind of resonance that we all feel is important? Well, perhaps we have to face into their fragility, but balance that against the need to offer access and the need to enjoy what makes our collections special. We want, wherever possible at V&A East, to give our audiences meaningful access, to shift the balance of conservation towards the needs of our young audiences, toward access. I see this approach as being not just important, not just out of respect for our magnificent collections, but also out of respect for our ultimate bosses, those for whom our collections are actually held in trust, the public. And I think that to do that in East London makes it all the more important. In this bit of London, it's a fascinating part of the world. I mean, parts of East London have been utterly transformed by the Olympics, by its legacy, by a decade of investment and demographic change. Anyone who knew this bit of London in the 90s will understand quite how radical the transformation of this bit of the city has been. To the north of our site is an area that has been completely rewilded, the Lee Valley. This is 10,000 acres of open, accessible green spaces that stretches out in an unbroken green pasture from Stratford, where our museum sits, through Tottenham, through Chingford, beyond the M25, out into unbroken countryside. That is a green space which is 20 times bigger than Regent's Park. To the west, there is huge gentrification in pockets, places like Hackney that have been utterly transformed over the last 20 years. It was always one of the most creative parts of London, with the highest ratios of practicing artists. But now it's also an area with some of the fastest growing property prices, some of the best restaurants, and also some of the most diverse independent retail. And then further west, the city, new buildings, new infrastructure, and even more important, post-Brexit. This is an area that is expected to generate more than a third of Britain's GDP. And then, adjacent to us, there are areas that contrast with that as greatly as you could possibly imagine. Areas that haven't benefited from the recent change and the recent investment. Places like South Newham, the youngest and the most culturally diverse borough in London, and one of the most economically challenged areas in Europe. And to the east and to the north, old East London, populations that haven't changed, that feel rooted to that area for many generations. But they are also some of the most culturally underserved in the southeast of Britain. So, not just 4 boroughs with particular narratives, but what feels when you visit like more than 1 million discrete stories of its local populations. The world is here in East London, and this in turn is a doorway to the world. This area has for centuries been one of the most globally creative hubs in Britain. Long before artists like Yinka Shonobare set up his studio here, long before designers like Alexander McQueen came here to study, long before photographers like David Bailey, who was born here, or even before people like Charles Dickens in the 1850s, before he would walk here in the evenings for inspiration. This bit of East London was a place of makers and a place of immigrants, of artists and of shifting populations. And it makes sense that amongst these communities who have over centuries given so much to Britain, so much creative energy, that the culture sector, supported by the Mayor of London, supported by FFL and by central government, would invest in the development of a new cultural hub. And to place it at the centre of the old Olympic Park, to the south of Stratford Station, which can take you to Europe, and Westfield, one of the biggest shopping centres in Europe, a new University College London campus that will house robotics departments and architecture schools, and become home to 4,000 students and more than 200 academic staff, a new state-of-the-art BBC music studio and auditoria that will become home to their orchestras, a new Sadler's Wells Theatre and dance studio, and a vast London College of Fashion building that will bring together 5,000 students from their varied old sites. And this influx of energy of students, of cultural institutions, of shoppers, of supporting infrastructure is not just transforming East London, it's shifting the creative and commercial axis of our city eastward, transforming geography, lives, and local economy. East Bank will become like Exhibition Road, where the old V&A was sited, a creative campus capable of shifting our understanding of ourselves and the world around us, of transforming the relationship between the academic world and the creative, between publics and opportunity. This, in my mind, is the perfect antidote to post-Brexit, post-COVID Britain. An investment in our future, in our young, in skills, in the overlooked and the underserved, and in a diverse, dynamic, creative Britain. And at its heart, the most beautiful building in my mind on the park, V&A East. Designed by O'Donnell and Tooby, it's a 4-story jewel of a building that, when complete, will allow us to tell stories that reflect the very best of creativity. And to do so through the creative disciplines that are celebrated in all of those other cultural institutions across the park. And to showcase those stories that will shine a light on performance, on fashion and on design, on architecture, doing so through a lens that will demonstrate the diversity and international scope of our collection and their power to speak to us all. And just 5 minutes away from this remarkable new building, we're underpinning the changing programme of the waterfront with a completely new kind of museological proposition. We want to do something that is probably a bit counterintuitive for many museum practitioners. We want to open up our collections for the use, for the inspiration, for the education, for the amusement of local people, for East London, for this incredible repository of objects and archives to become a reservoir of ideas for the creative industries, a source book of inspiration for the young and the experienced, a well of possibilities that we hope will dynamize new thinking. We want to remove the barriers. Race, cultural diversity, age, class, educational attainment must not be impediments to engagement, should not connote the nature of cultural ease or the degree of comfort that you'll feel when you visit our space. Whilst we must acknowledge that the varied routes that people might take to bring us to our site, we want our space to feel communal, to feel shared. We believe that access is key. We believe that inspiration and pleasure drawn from proximity to beauty is of universal benefit. And through difference and diversity, we can simultaneously celebrate the thing that links them. How we can transcend all of that difference through beauty. In many ways, what we're trying to do isn't new. When Henry Cole, the founder of the V&A, first sought to build a permanent museum, he wanted it to be radical, to liberate rather than control creativity, to galvanize rather than institutionalize ingenuity. He wanted it to become a place of flux. He hoped that the V&A might, at its best, be transformative. And so under his control, he pioneers new innovations in museum practice. This is the first museum in the 1870s to pioneer gaslighting, late opening hours, to allow working men and women to visit after work. It has a cafe to provide rest and social opportunities, studios and a library for practical study. But Cole's methods were nevertheless limited by his time, by a culture of certainty, of a kind of patrician Victorian perspective on things. And today we have to accept we don't have a monopoly on truth. Indeed, history, interpretation are at their most thrilling when they are part of dynamic exchanges with makers and audiences. And whilst we want our audiences to be changed by engaging with our collection, we also want to do that thing that I've been trying to talk about throughout this talk, of allowing our institution to have the potential to be changed by our visitors. And to deliver that, we have to work in new ways. We've witnessed how digital tools and infrastructure have transformed the distribution of film and television, how digital engagement has changed retail and patterns of customer engagement. And as yet, museums haven't found the transformative digital paradigms to truly shift the notion of a museum visit. And we believe that we have an opportunity at the Collection Centre to deliver a new kind of engagement and transform users' experience of our collection. For Gen Z, that generation who between 15 and 25, a demographic who were so used to customization, so used to authenticity, that we want to craft an environment and an experience that will allow them to not just see beautiful things, but to truly engage with them, to offer our visitors the opportunity to engage with them directly, with our collections meaningfully, and then to leave digitally something of themselves behind. So we hope that the V&A East will not just be a repository of beautiful things, but also a repository of reflections and memories, to feel over time like a genuinely shared space. We accept that we have to build around these aspirations a kind of culture to ensure that our collection remains safe. But access has to be a priority. We want our collections to live. A key metric for our institution's success has to be how people are left feeling. We want to do something that sits within that glorious tradition of this dynamic bit of East London. I think the new cultural landscape, this new moment, requires new kinds of institutions, new museums that can re-energize collections for new audiences and recalibrate themselves to the concerns, rhythms, and modes of productions of this new age. And I think we at the V&A have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to build a truly exceptional, experiential storehouse of art and design, and pair it with a gallery and exhibition platform to create a campus for the imagination, to forge a space of account and reconciliation, a space within which we might acknowledge the complex and difficult histories that our collections represent, and negotiate relationships of empathy, of equity, of openness, and do so with cultures, communities, artists, and makers of the world. Could I just finish now, just with one of the great memories of a lifetime of travel, which was a very brief encounter in southern Ghana. It was at the end of a glorious day where I'd attended a flag festival. And these are festivals in which local people fly these beautiful heraldic flags. It's one of the most breathtaking things. If you get the chance, do visit one of them. And in the mid-afternoon, when the festival drew to a close, from amongst the lines of flags, a flag dancer appeared, and he was twisting and twirling a gold-colored flag in the air and arching his body forward as he was dancing, and dancing to the sound of this amazing kind of drumming. First, it was one drummer, and he began just drumming with single beats. And then he was joined by dozens of drummers weaving subtle modulations on the original beat. Then more and more complex passages of beats diffused one into another, until the whole street quaked with drum beats, every beat modulated by the flag dancer, every drummer across the whole breadth of the street beating in unison with the flag dancing. And it was glorious. And then I noticed that with each gust of the wind, the old flag was gradually unraveling, tearing. Tiny lengths of thread and scraps of material were breaking away from the flag and snapping in the wind, flecks of fabric flaking away and sailing out across the flag and across the crowds and dusting their sweaty foreheads and upper shoulders with little flecks of cloth. With each gust, the length and life of the flag was shortened, but with each gust, it would anoint the guests with a dusting of itself, with a dusting of history. The flag as both a symbol of continuity of the strength of that shared culture and an analogue of the fragility of histories, of how we must fight for our heritage, both as living, fragile things, but also as a material, beautiful, meaningful embodiment of the very best of humanity. Thank you very much.
Wow, what a compelling and exciting vision you just presented there, Gus. And struck as someone who was brought up in London, I'm tempted to immediately get on a plane, and not only visit East London, but Ghana. And there's other fantastic images and examples that you've given us. And I suppose now what we'd like to focus on is how we can beat the drum for Belfast and how we can actually maybe learn some of the lessons, not only from your own great example, but around the world. There have been some great examples which in the past, Belfast has looked to, in terms of inspiring its urban regeneration programs, and particularly trying to put culture at the heart of that. Our listeners and people who are logging into this webcast are probably where we're running a campaign called Build Belfast Back Better, where we're asking people to give us their top 3 ideas on how the city can regenerate and reimagine itself post-pandemic. And we've had some really interesting proposals submitted through our website. So I certainly encourage people to contribute to this little campaign where we'll share the ideas with civic leaders, after the festival. But I was wondering if we could maybe just focus, with our esteemed panelists, and perhaps starting off with Suzanne, and then with Jack, and with Susan, to give them their quick thoughts really, and responding to what Gus has said, and just to outline their own responses and perhaps the organizations that they're involved with, how we can perhaps use culture as an engine for urban regeneration and community development. Suzanne, what did you make of Gus's presentation?
Absolutely fascinating, and like you, I can't wait to get on a plane and go and see the V&A in East London. But a lot of it actually really resonated with me and what we're trying to do. First of all, with our new Belfast Destination Hub right in the heart of Belfast city centre. And, you know, the things that really resonated with me, Gus, on that were that we want to create something which is completely unique, which is completely at the right point in our history, and can utilize, you know, all of the digital media, for example, that we have available to us. And you know, the whole idea behind the hub that we're trying to put into the city centre in Belfast really goes to the heart of what is humankind. It is a study in humankind, really. And you know, the fact that you're encouraging local people and also international people to come in there, their stories to collide, really, and them also to be changed by what they see, and to change the stories for the future people that come in through those doors as well, and what they're going to discover. That's precisely what we want to see happen here in Belfast, but through what is unique to Belfast, right?
Yeah,
So what this hub, and why it's called a hub, is because it brings together a number of things. It brings together the stories of this city, and of course, you know, we have had a conflicted past, so it will deal with those from many different angles, but it will collect the stories in the first person, so that will be completely different and unique. And of course, you said there's no one monopoly on the truth either.
yeah,
That will be very important in this particular visitor attraction and cultural venue for our local people. And we also want to look not only at the past, but clearly the stories of the present, the peace process, what we're going through at this point in time, and what kind of a city we are, and then to look at, well, reimagining the city of the future. And that isn't just for our local people, but also those international visitors as well, and the contribution that they can make and the challenges that they can give us as local people. So the stories will be, of course, of, you know, our ancestors, the people that exist now, and our children. They'll be of you know, hate and love, of love and loss, and all of those things that will really resonate with every single human being on this globe today. And you know, and it will also then sit alongside a film centre, culture and film. And we want people to leave behind some of their reflections as well. And we want our children or young people to be skilled up in terms of filmmaking. We are also a city of makers and of engineers and of creators, and that's currently where our growth sectors are in terms of, you know, filmmaking, in terms of technology, etc. And we're building on that as well. But we also want this attraction to have tentacles right out into the whole city and into our neighbourhoods as well, and into the whole of Northern Ireland. So it will encourage people when they come in and they're immersed and they get that experience of certain stories of certain parts of the city or certain parts of our history. They want to go out and discover more of those for themselves. So they go out into East Belfast and they do the Van Morrison Trail in East Belfast, or they go to West Belfast and they learn more about what's happening with the Irish language, for example, in that part of the city as well. So it's a very dynamic thing. And of course, the architectural design will be incredibly important as well. We want this to be a thing of real beauty as well, like the images that you have just shown us. And there is real money behind it too, which is great, right? Because very often we have these brilliant concepts and it's very hard to get these off the ground. So this is one of our city deal projects. It will be £100 million of investment between our executive and our local councils, and it will sit within a whole beautiful regenerated part of the city. We have our university new campus with students coming in from September this year to that part of the city, and a new transport hub as well close by. And of course, Susan's sitting there from Cathedral Quarter with real access into that area. And our hope is that this will not take away from any of our other brilliant culture and venues. In fact, it will support and enhance them significantly. And because we know here in Belfast, for example, our top 10 visitor centres at the minute bring in about 2.5 million visitors a year, compared to, say, the top 10 in Dublin, which bring in about 10 million visitors a year. Yeah, so there's such room to grow, but we see it as being completely transformative, and also looking at the future of our identity on this island as well.
Well, I'll be queuing up for that, Suzanne.
Yeah,
absolutely compelling vision, absolutely beautiful.
That's just one thing, Pete. That's just one of our projects, and Peter can bring me back in later and I can talk about some more as well. But I'll make sure you get a personal invitation, Gus.
I would love that. Utterly thrilling, and just in terms of the sentiment, the tone, the aspirations, just so timely. We need these kinds of projects, Suzanne.
So timely, which is why there's so much resonance between what you're saying and what I'm saying. Oh, they're completely different projects. Yeah. But
linked by a kind of a shared set of aspirations at the same time. Fantastic. Absolutely. So wonderful to hear that. I'm totally inspired. And
great.
As soon as I have the chance, I'll be on a plane as well.
There you go. We're going to be flying all around the world. And of course, people can hear more from Suzanne. She's very kindly taken part in events on Thursday with us, with Queen's University Belfast on the Belfast Region City deal. So there's lots more to hear, about that exciting project later on in our festival. But I thought at this point it'd be useful to bring Jack in, who's, been an exponent of design-led thinking. And not only is he very familiar with London, having worked there, but his organization has been to the forefront of some very innovative and creative responses locally. And I'd love to hear more, Jack, in terms of how you've responded to Gus earlier.
Yeah, and well, listen, and thanks, Gus, as well, for the fantastic introduction and presentation on the V&A East and the vision and the aspiration. It really set the scene and got us all thinking, I think. I suppose from our perspective, or from our point of view, urban scale interventions, like Peter's sort of established there, we try and tackle city challenges through the lens. We use culture and cultural participation as a tool to tackle those city challenges, whether it's health and well-being, whether it's urban regeneration, whether it's participation, identity, whatever it might be. And I think you touched, Gus, on a number of things actually that were really interesting there. From our perspective, certainly, which is a lot of what we try and do is build narrative into the place. How do we build narrative into places that help shape that identity? And as you talked about, that authenticity, it feels like an authentic place that we want to be in, whether you're a local or whether you're a visitor. And for us, I think that means cultural participation. So how do we actually use culture and cultural participation to look at kind of place making, place shaping, city challenges, and city development? And I jotted down, I suppose, 3 things that for us, they intertwine quite nicely, I think, with some of the themes that you were talking about, Gus. But 3 things that we focus on when we start to build or look at what culture for urban regeneration looks like. And I think the first, and we talked about it briefly just before we kind of went live, if you like. But the first one is really to understand what our cultural assets actually are, particularly in a place, whether that's a city, a region, a neighbourhood, whatever that might be. And we know that, and you talked yourself about cultural institutions, there's museums, there's theatres, there's galleries, there's universities, schools, colleges, artist studios. But I think what's really important is those, the kind of rich, intangible cultural assets, if you like, the stories, the flag ceremony, the flag, festival, that kind of, the intangible stories, the people, the networks, the moments and spaces where things might have happened, or stories that might be connected to them. We're doing a number of kind of mapping projects across the city, and it's as much about that kind of physical cultural infrastructure as it is about understanding what's the intangible or cultural infrastructure that we have there. A project that we can talk more on, but is based out in East Belfast and probably similar kind of socioeconomic makeup in some instances to East London. We're looking at the development of Portview Trade Centre, and there again, it was the oldest or the biggest flax spinning mill in its time. And now it's, we've got this huge space that we're looking at. So physically, there's real rich kind of cultural heritage there, but it's also about the stories. And we ran a similar campaign actually to you with the local population there, talking about what does this space mean for you? What are the stories connected to this space? What are they? And then now we're starting to showcase it through building some of that narrative in. And believe it or not, there's a narrative there linked to bananas and how this building was linked to kind of bringing bananas into the UK. And so there's this whole narrative now that's been built up through this building in East Belfast that's looking at developing that site as a place of growth, of cultural curiosity, and of unexpected outcomes that has all come from that engagement with people on the ground. I think the second thing that came to mind and that I think is really important is the role for the role of culture in urban regeneration is kind of when we do it, if you like, and how can we be proactive rather than reactive, which it sounds like V&A East really is very proactive in obviously the development of East London, but obviously how do we do it here? How can culture be at the heart of any kind of urban development initiative? So what are the tools, what are the frameworks that we have in place where we can put culture sort of integrated into the delivery of urban regeneration? So it's not this kind of nice bolt-on, nice to have feature that we do at the end of an urban regeneration project or at the end of when we're trying to create a space in a city, but it's actually embedded in the heart of it. A project that we've worked with Suzanne and the team on at Belfast City Council is the lighting strategy. And some lighting interventions in Belfast city centre. And again, it's come from that co-design process of actually understanding some of the narratives within Belfast and the city centre, and developing then a set of guidelines so that anyone now going to do lighting in the city centre in Belfast has a set of guidelines that shows actually you need to embed culture and cultural participation when you create new lighting installations, for example, in the city. And I guess the final thing that kind of links in to what you were saying, Gus, is really that role. And again, we talked about it, but the role that culture can have in creating that sense of place and that sense that people feel they belong to. And it was really interesting that you were sort of saying about how some of the things that you're doing in the V&A East in terms of that participation element of particularly local people and opening the doors and opening the collections. And I think this is really true of kind of culture and culture's role really in urban regeneration, of getting people excited, getting people active in their area. And I think we can really do that through kind of cultural participation. Also, not only just links to culture, but links and builds to loads of other kind of great city objectives and health and well-being objectives and all sorts that we know is fundamentally kind of objectives of kind of well-being, if you like, and give people that sense of feeling, that new kind of engagement, as you were talking about, kind of campus of imagination. And if we can bring that into to people there, we ran a similar project in North Belfast for the Public Health Agency that looked actually at kind of well-being, but how do we do that through cultural-led urban regeneration? And again, real kind of grassroots, getting people involved in cultural conversation to then improve, small things from their local area, whether it was bird boxes to bring in nature, or whether it was sharing meals, young people and old people sharing meals to sort of increase participation. But it was all about that kind of where culture meets health and well-being. So anyway, in a nutshell, I'll wrap up there. But those were, I suppose, 3 takeaways that I think link quite nicely, Gus, to some of the themes that you're certainly talking about at V&A East.
That was amazing, Jack, and so many powerful synergies. And I think it kind of speaks to both the power of the arts, but also the vulnerability of this particular moment in history, in which that there is so much kind of there's been so much sort of polarization, and post Brexit. I do feel that there are real opportunities for culture to demonstrate what it almost uniquely does in creating those spaces in which we can come together, and exactly the sorts of programs that you are talking about become not just important but critical, I think, in terms of forging ways in which communities can emerge from what has been a difficult or corrosive period, and to emerge and then not just replicate the same kinds of divisions that we went into this period with, but to think about, this is an opportunity for real change, for us to think again about what is important to us. And culture is one of the few spaces in which we can do that. And it's not an addition that should be thought about as something which is just a nice sort of condiment that can be added to kind of, wider regeneration. This is something that, it can lead in terms of regeneration, that needs to be fundamental to regeneration, that it's the thing that ties together regeneration projects.
Yeah.
If we get this right, it can be the thing that makes projects that are deeply problematic hugely successful. I think investing in culture, not as an addition, but as a critical part of something that we think about from the very beginnings of planning regeneration programs, is something I think that we should all be embracing.
Mm.
Thanks, Gus. You talk our language. And, I'm going to shamelessly plug a couple of events close to Jack's heart. USI are actually organizing an event for us during the festival. They're showcasing a number of their initiatives, and his mention of Portview reminds me to plug a very innovative music event that we're having. I think it's on Saturday night. It's the fine tour at the weekend, where a number of young creatives are actually highlighting the history and the background to Portview, that whole warehouse complex in East Belfast. So a couple of events to look out for there. Just to remind people who are logging in, who are watching this, you're very welcome to submit comments, questions on the chat function. So feel free to use that facility. But talking about community engagement and participation, there's no finer advocate that we have in terms of Susan Picken, who has led so many of these initiatives in the past, first in her role at Queen's Film Theatre, but now as the director of the Cathedral Quarter Trust. And Susan, would you like to respond to what you've heard so far?
Yeah, well, I was nodding very vigorously, and if you could see my notepad, I've got things like beauty, exclamation mark, transformation, exclamation mark, and as Pete said, you're definitely speaking my language. I think, again, to echo Suzanne as well, when you were talking, Gus, the parallels between the Cathedral Quarter, which is the bit of the city that I look after, and East London in particular, I think are really sort of interesting. They're both traditional, industrial, working class, old areas that have been, since the early 90s and the mid 90s, have been undergone gentrification, and I think are still kind of constantly being reinvented. So it's really interesting to think about how those areas of cities reinvent themselves, and I suppose actually how we reinvent cities as we move forward. And this is less a response and more a series of questions and thoughts and jottings and provocations, which was really that both the V&A East and the Belfast Destination Hub that Suzanne described, which is a project I'm very familiar with and endorse, I think it's wonderful, and obviously V&A East is wonderful as well, but they're very big institution-based macro projects, as it were. And I'm really interested in what can we do on a micro level to make sure that culture is integrated. Thinking about our city centres, we have 40% more retail space than we are likely to need, in terms of how do we make cities animated and safe and inclusive and welcoming for people. And how do we involve culture and community in those sorts of discussions at the very kind of introductory level, and make sure that from a grassroots up as well as a top level down, that we can kind of bring that all together. I think one of the things that I find particularly interesting about V&A East is that you're actively working with artists, and participation is key in your DNA. And I'd love to see Belfast in tandem with the Belfast Destination Hub, really working to see how we can bring in artists and creatives and communities and sustainability groups and all of those sort of entities, and work with them at a day-to-day level. So they're part of the fabric of our cities and our society, and not just, sometimes it feels like culture is magic dust that gets sprinkled on at the end. And so it's the bicarbonate of soda in the bread mix. It's the thing that makes it all happen and makes it all rise. Those are the sort of things that I want to see happening. I sometimes feel that there's been a lot of discussion about how the arts and culture and heritage and community will help to sort of turn around maybe recovery from post-COVID, what our cities will be in the future, the role that they play. And I think that's really, really exciting. I do get a little bit wary though, because I think particularly in Northern Ireland, the cultural sector, is still suffering from COVID quite significantly as well. We still have a long way to go. Probably it'll be the sector that comes out last out of all of this. So, we can do this and we can make our contribution to the city, but we will need support and help to do it. And, we also need places to be able to do it in. Whether that's vacant shops, empty shopping centres, whatever. And that's probably going to take bravery and innovation and sort of vision, I think, as well on the part of property owners and city planners. If you look at somewhere like Stockton-on-Tees, they're demolishing a shopping centre to build a park, which, and a sort of community hub, which I think is really, really interesting. And those are the sorts of things that I think the cultural sector can really be involved in at a grassroots level in Belfast. So that's it from me, really.
Thank you, Susan.
But I think that the cultural industries, that it's not that we should be seen as being a kind of extravagance, a sort of indulgence. That an investment in culture is, I've visited Belfast as a tourist, and the cultural offer, if you were to invest in that, it would pay back hugely in terms of not just in terms of the tourist offer, but in terms of the local domestic offer as well. And I think as a way of articulating a kind of, in this particular period, a sort of a moment in which we want to come together and begin to think about what is the future that we want to carve, that learns from the complexities of the future, but which offers us a kind of hope that perhaps the past didn't. It's give artists the chance to help us to think about some of those possibilities. And you mentioned sustainability and all of the big issues around sort of environment and that some of those issues which are ineffable and difficult and troubling and worrying, particularly for the young. Let's help artists to help us to navigate some of these things and do it in beautiful ways. I just think there are so many answers that can be answered through the culture sector, some of which are things which get you by the heart, others which are very much in the head, but there are also those really concrete, crunchy things which will, for the sorts of people that I think, are key and core to your initiatives, will grab people by the wallet. It's going to get me to come and visit Belfast, is thinking about the amazing array of artists that you have, just living locally, to give them the spaces in those inner city areas, in those shops which are being disused, to transform those places. And then over a generation, it may be that those spaces can be repurposed into other things. But in most areas of regeneration, it's the artists who are the pioneers, who go into the places that were once upon a time seen as being risky and turn them into places where everyone wants to be. I think this is a time in which let's embrace art as being, you know, the sort of the searchlight that is going to kind of shine a light in the direction that we want to be. You know, this is the time to invest, but do it in advance rather than when it's already happening. And, you know, let's do it now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Peter, can I come in and add to that? Yeah,
Yes,
so, you know, I totally agree. I think culture and regeneration, and particularly post-COVID, are absolutely integrated and, you know, need to be seen that way from the outset, no doubt about it. And, you know, that's one of the reasons why we have a 10-year cultural strategy, a city imagining, as opposed to just thinking of it as funding program from year to year to really build and support the sector. But I do think there is a lot more convincing that we can do of our executive, in that everyone is looking for hope. And word you use, Gus, and I think that that culture, certainly art, etc., brings hope and brings pride and brings people back together again. And I do think that there needs to be a coalescing of an approach now to what we're going to do, both at a city level but also at a Northern Ireland executive level, in terms of the future and the integration of culture and art to building back better. And that's really, really important to us. And I think, you know, involving local communities, we've obviously, Susan, you'll know, we've put a few artists and residents out in some communities and to help communities reimagine their future as well. I mean, that's a brilliant example of you know, getting local people really, really involved and really excited about the future. But I do think the time is absolutely now to get this right. But it will take us all to be on the same page, right?
Absolutely.
Across the, you know, the culture and arts sector, private sector and the public sector, to really make sure we can capitalize on that. And as you know, as Gus says, we have such assets here, and we don't capitalize on them enough, and I don't mean that in monetary terms, but we really do, and we have such fantastic stories to tell, and you know, fantastic artists of all forms to really celebrate. So let's make more of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I also think as well, Suzanne, just that, you know, artists and creatives, and we can all bring new perspectives. As Gus said, something about addressing the challenges. And when you have a difficult set of circumstances, we can kind of give answers to, we can probably create answers to problems that you may not know that you have yet, by being involved at an early level.
Don't disagree at all. I mean, you know, we're trying to reimagine the city centre completely, right? So, and we've called it our bolder vision, and we've kind of put out what ifs to the world and the community. You know, what if we took our ring road around Belfast and made it into a linear park? Those kind of things, right? Now, I'm sure there are lots more what ifs. Sure, there are many, many more. And by going through that kind of integrated process and listening more to creative people like you and your colleagues, I'm sure we'll be able to reimagine even better.
It comes to that joining up piece, just to jump in, sorry, but you were talking there, Suzanne, about how do you join up, you know, departments, executives, the cultural sector, etc.
Yeah.
Actually, culture can be a really strong tool in that. Like you're saying, the bolder vision, the Belfast agenda, the cultural strategy, the resilience strategy, whatever strategy it is, you actually find that culture can link a lot of the objectives and the you know, and the indicators together through a number of the projects that you can do through culture. So it is that glue, or the bicarbonate, as Susan.
Well, we're doing a lot
and
of
the fun.
Yeah, and the fun bit, yeah, as well, yeah.
Yeah.
I can't wait to visit. Thank you. I was hoping to draw you to London, but I've absolutely kind of now, I've got my ticket booked. I can't wait to come to Belfast. And I mean, the things that just having the caliber of people, you know, like yourselves there with the ideas, and I think in terms of this moment, there is such a need and appetite. And I think if we join those two things together, catalyzed, as you say, with a little bit of funding, and I think we could make some real magic.
Folks, what a lovely note to finish on. As usual, we've run out of time. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you to our audience for joining us. I think we've got 110 events now left in our program, so there's plenty more to view, and we've quite a few events looking at placemaking. So I hope we can continue this debate and discussion in the future, and we can all meet up physically in the future. So stay safe, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.